everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important panel discussion on HIV criminalization. My name is Marnina Miller, and I am honored to serve as the moderator for this important conversation with these two incredible advocates who have firsthand experience on challenging and also navigating HIV criminalization. Now, before we delve into this topic and this discussion, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. Your advocacy is so important to this movement. Could you please share your name, your pronouns, and give us a brief overview of your current work within the HIV movement? And any one of you can start. LaShonda, you want to start first?
I will. I'm LaShonda Salinas, she, her, and hers pronoun. I've been living with HIV 26 years. And my current work with the HIV movement is to, first of all, tell my story. And second, to make awareness to the legislators and the senators about this law and get them to help us repeal it or amend it so we can move forward.
Thank you so much for that, LaShonda. Robert, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Robert Suttle, he, him, his pronouns. I'm currently based in New York City. And like LaShonda, I am also a person living with HIV, a long-term survivor, 20 years living with HIV. And my current work right now is that I work independently. Years ago, I co-founded an organization called the Zero Project, but currently I work with the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation as chair of the Council of Justice Leaders for their HIV is Not a Crime campaign. And also I work with the, of course, Health Not Prisons Collective by way with the partnership with the caucus and other organizations, as well as I'm a part of the global advisory panel for the HIV Justice Network, which is more of our international body of advocates around the world who are fighting to decriminalize HIV in other countries. And so I'm happy to be here today to speak with Marnina, as well as share the platform with LaShonda.
Wow, you all do some amazing work, not only global, not only nationally, but also internationally. So thank you all so much for your work. Could you share a brief overview of your personal experiences with HIV criminalization and how it has impacted your life? I'm gonna start with Robert on this one.
Oh, well, I experienced HIV criminalization back in 2008 is really when it started. I was diagnosed in 2003. So 5 years after my diagnosis, I experienced something that I never thought I would experience, not just a diagnosis of being HIV positive, but also facing prosecution. As a Black man growing up in the South, we know that criminalization or prosecution of Black men is pretty common, but never would I imagine that it would be for a diagnosis, for a health status. And so my situation arose out of my casual encounter with someone that I was intimate with. And as a result of my HIV status came into question after we broke up. And unfortunately, that person decided to press charges against me for allegedly not disclosing my status to them. And so unfortunately, that meant that my life changed because I was arrested at work. I was eventually prosecuted, took a plea deal, had to eventually serve 6 months in prison simply because of how I was inappropriately sentenced initially. I was given a probated sentence for 2 years, but took that issue to court because I found out that I had to register as a sex offender, which was something that I was not prepared for. And by doing that, it caused the court to relook at how I was sentenced, and it required that I had to do mandatory prison time, which eventually was 6 months of hard labor in the South Louisiana prison. And so that is my experience with HIV criminalization. And I am still dealing with the collateral consequences of that experience, mainly the registry, being on the registry. It was required that I be on for 15 years. And since then, I've moved around to different states and to be compliant, try to register within those states. And each of those states come different experiences of what requirements is necessary around registering, which I think we'll get more into that in this interview. But that's the extent of my experience with HIV criminalization.
Thank you so much, Robert, for being so vulnerable with your answer. Even though we are cool, I have never heard your full story. So thank you for sharing that with us. LaShonda, I also want to ask you too, what has been your experience as far as being on the registry?
Well, I have to ditto everything that Robert said. Our situation is really not any different except for which he did 6 months and I did a little of 2 months. And like him, I took a plea deal of 3 years probation. And in that plea, no one ever told me that I would have to be on the sex offender registry. So that's how that's my personal experience, and it's affected me because I can't be around any family members. So that right there sent me into a little depression for 16 years.
And I know the laws have recently changed in Tennessee. Can you really describe your emotions and your thoughts when you found out about that law change in Tennessee?
Wow. I didn't really know I was removed from the registry until I guess it was about the fourth or so when my best friend Tiffany called me, and she was blowing up my phone. It was the emails, it was the text messages, it was the phone call. So I finally called her back, and she had told me, go and research your name on the sex offender registry. So I did that. I didn't see myself at all. So I'm like, okay, this is a mistake. Let me do it again. And I did it again. I was not there. So then about 2 days later, I went to the agency that I registered with, and they had told me on July the 7th of 2023, I was no longer on the registry. And that was just a big weight off of my shoulders because I knew I could finally be with family now and be around all my little cousins.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad that you got that experience. Robert, living in a state without specific HIV criminalization laws, can you share how being on the registry has impacted your life, especially when considering the absence of specific laws in New York?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's still something I'm still exploring or navigating as I continue to live here in New York City. Yes, New York City doesn't have an HIV specific law. However, it does have a statute or public health law that speaks to the fact of if someone intentionally exposes someone to any type of vulnerable communicable disease, excuse me. And so it's not HIV specific, but people living with HIV can still be prosecuted under it. And there have been other litigations that have happened in this state, and I'm still learning how the New York state works in terms of its criminal justice system. I'm originally from the South, so I definitely understand how the systems work down there. But however, even though they don't have an HIV specific law here, they do have the sex offender registry laws. And so the Sex Offender Registration Notification, because of the Sex Offender Registration Notification Act, each state tries to comply with that federal law as it relates to the registry. So in other words, most people that may transfer to the state of New York or any other states from other states, excuse me, to New York State, and they are on the registry, most likely they will be required to register here in New York State. And unfortunately, it's no different for me, even though they don't have a specific law pertaining to the law that I was prosecuted under in the state of Louisiana. And so many people aren't aware of that because New York is known to be somewhat, or New York City rather, to be somewhat liberal. in that. However, they are not as liberal when it comes to other issues. And in this case, me being someone who is living with HIV, but put on the registry or at least required from another state, they, of course, want to err on the side of caution. And probably not want to setting any new precedents. And so therefore they err on the side of me being on the registry, even though they don't have laws that prosecute people specifically based on their HIV status. And so that has been my dilemma. And it still is, because I don't really know how much longer I'm supposed to be on the registry here in New York. I'm just being compliance, and I do that annually. And however, back in Louisiana, it was required that I do 15 years. And so technically 15 years will end next year. Um, However, I've not been in that state for over a decade now. And so from what I understand with the law, that if you leave that state, you tend to lose credit, or you don't get credit for the time that I've been away. And so I'm really in a position where I'm in limbo right now, because if New York would tell me, oh, well, you need to go back to Louisiana and deal with it there, which of course can be a whole process in itself because of just the nature of this issue. And so I've tried to challenge it in the courts here in New York State. However, the highest court chose not to hear our argument as to why I shouldn't have to be on the registry. And so therefore, I'm just taking it day by day, month by month to deal with, again, the collateral consequences of it. And so that's been the extent of my experience with living in a state that doesn't have an HIV specific law. However, there are other laws that you have to take in consideration.
And I would like to know, I live in Texas, so we do not have an HIV criminalization law on the books. However, we do have sentencing enhancement. Do they have sentencing enhancement in New York City or New York State?
You know, I've not had many discussions around sentence enhancements here in New York, but I would not be surprised. I think it depends on, of course, the nature of the situation, as to, what the person's being charged with, and why, and sort of the merits of what that situation encounters. But I have not engaged or encountered any type of issues around that. But I wouldn't think that it's impossible. It just, I think, would depend on the situation, also what laws are there as it relates to that.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. LaShonda, we are both Health Not Prisons advocates, and that's originally how we met. And I love your banner in the background representing us. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about the goals of the collective and how it aims to address HIV criminalization?
HMP takes an intersectional approach to ending HIV criminalization. And, that's what makes us so unique. We recognize that people living with HIV and people most impacted by HIV can experience variety forms of criminalizations of abortion, drug use, gender affirming care, and anything else along that line. And that these forms of criminalizations are all connected and stem from the same root cause of white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and queerphobia. HMP is committed to building the leadership of BIPOCs, people living with HIV, and ending criminalization. And, there are these folks who are mostly impacted by HIV criminalization and should be at the forefront of their state's HIV criminalization coalitions. This is the purpose of HMP Advocates Project. HMP was founded in 2020, and that they are composed of 5 partner organizations, which are PWN, Transgender Law Center, U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, Counter Narrative Project, and the Sarah Project. These particular organizations are all led by and accountable to people living with HIV and communities most impacted by HIV.
Thank you for sharing that about the work we do and how important this work is to be MIPA led, which means the meaningful involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS. And I really love the work that H&P does because it brings folks living with HIV to the forefront of talking about HIV decriminalization. Oftentimes, when coalitions are created, people living with HIV are not at the forefront. And so the fact that these organizations are saying, hey, we want to make sure that people living with HIV are at the forefront of this movement is extremely important. And so that's super, super amazing. So thank you so much for talking about what H&P is. So Robert, as a steering committee member of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, can you share a little bit about what the caucus is doing at a national level to help end HIV criminalization?
Yes, the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus is what you call a network of networks. And so that is the model in which we operate in, which some of those networks have been mentioned here. And they're also part of Health Not Prisons Collective, the Zero Project, Positive Women's Network. And then we have the other organizations that are accountable to communities that are impacted by HIV. And so the caucus pretty much supports networks. It supports our major networks, Zero, PWN, but it also supports other smaller, maybe not as formal networks that may exist, that do exist in other states. So through our steering committee members who are very active in their particular regions, state, cities, or what have you, they are really connected to people there on the ground. And so the caucus has been supportive through supporting those networks by providing like mini grants, if you will, to our steering committee members to put on programs, community education programs, and to, in some ways, introduce HIV criminalization to the community members or to those that are actively doing criminalization work or advocacy in some kind of way, and just bringing people together within certain cities or states to do something that is more of a either statewide or maybe just local programming. So really a lot of the community education, because we know that even within our HIV community, that there may be people who do support criminalization for all sorts of reasons. And so we want to make sure that those people are educated to the fullest extent around our advocacy work to decrim HIV criminalization, because as I say, that regardless of how you might have encountered becoming HIV positive, that the way the law is written, it doesn't really care about that. It doesn't really care about that story or your feelings. That if we are living with HIV and we're still subjected to the HIV criminalization laws, and so so it's important for us to really have a good understanding of what that means. And so the caucus does its best to support the networks that are doing that work on the ground, as well as provide the community education around the issues to decrim HIV.
And thank you for the work y'all are doing over there. I like to say that HIV criminalization is like a patient to prison pipeline in which folks living with HIV are unknowing of a lot of these laws that are impacting their daily lives. So thank y'all for that education and all of the amazing work that y'all are doing over there at the caucus. I have a question for both of you all. What specific challenges have you encountered in fighting discrimination and stigma related to HIV criminalization? We know that stigma is super big when it comes to people living with HIV. We have internalized stigma, externalized stigma, and so many other different forms of stigma that can impact your daily lives. But how did specifically talking about HIV criminalization and fighting to have decriminalization go on in certain states, how did stigma impact you? And what ways did you overcome that stigma? And I'm going to ask that to LaShonda first.
Okay. For me, as you said, it has been stigma and talking about my story. And with that being said, it's been hard when I tell my story to news outlets and interviews, especially like in Vice News, when they put it on YouTube. And I would go and look at the comments and how most of them did not believe my story at all. But the other thing would be when I went to the Day on the Hill in 2021, and I had to tell my story, this senator that I spoke with, he made me so little and feel so little to the point it was like I didn't matter anymore. So I've overcome all of this by telling my story and telling myself, you matter. You are living with this. You are the subject matter expert. And I tell these legislators, you're going to see my face 1,000 times until you do something about this. And until you do, you're just going to keep seeing me, and I'm just going to be here.
And I'm so glad that you did not give up, LaShonda. You are a beacon of hope for so many people living with HIV. And I'm so happy and grateful that you decided to stick it out and decided to say, the heck with stigma. I am a woman living and thriving with HIV, and you're going to listen to me. I also want to hear about, like, what was your experience at Vice News? Because I did one recently and it was fun, but I want to hear your experience. And I also want to hear from Robert too about his experience, because I saw his Vice News segment as well.
Like you said, it was exciting. But it was too a little nerve-wracking because I let them deep into my life and I didn't hold back anything because I needed people to know this and know what's going on, how it's like to be criminalized for really no reason. But all in all, it was so fun. It really was.
I'm glad you had a good time. Yeah, don't stay away from the comments. Do not read the comments. They are the worst.
Mhm.
So, Robert, what about you? How can we all work towards creating like more awareness and talking about the challenges faced by people living with HIV on the registry?
Oh, I'm sorry, Marnie. Do you want me to answer the
Oh, let me go
previous
back. Let me
question?
go back. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. We're gonna
that's
have to
okay.
cut that out. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they can edit it.
I just want a whole different question. Okay, my man. Sorry about that. So we were talking about the Vice News. Let me go.
Or
The
stigma.
create that all that stuff out. So, Robert, what about you? What specific challenges have you encountered when facing discrimination and stigma when talking about HIV decriminalization? And how did you overcome that stigma? And let us know about that Vice News interview too.
Thank you for that question. It's still something that I'm thinking through because I'm the type that I, I may have been stigmatized in many different ways and just didn't know it, or even discriminated and just didn't know it because I don't know, I think I have a tendency to just kind of look over or through some things. However, there are some things that have come sort of coming up for me with this question. And, early on when I had to be put on the registry and all that community notification of what you have to do, I remember having to have on my driver's license the word sex offender on there. And I just thought that was the most awful thing in the world, to have that on your driver's license. And so those are just the few things that are one of the many things that come up for me. And currently now, I've been pretty brave and bold about sharing my story, which I don't have a problem with that. However, what I find to be pretty stigmatizing, in a sort of low-key way is just how there are those people that do care about this issue, that really care about what happens to people, but then there are people who sort of take advantage of it and the exploitation of it. And I'm sure LaShonda would agree, we're not really here for entertainment, with our pain. The experiences and the situations that we've been in have been painful. And for us to be bold enough to share that issue, it's to share that our story, but then also to be able to go higher with it, and talk about what the issue really is. I'm finding that there are entities that do take advantage of that. And I know we talk about the Vice interview, which I did. I definitely agreed to it. I did it because you never want to not do an opportunity to share your story, because you're all speaking to different audiences when you're being able to have those opportunities to to share. However, what I do not like is sort of the sensationalism, the questions, the sort of the aggressiveness to try to make it in a way that so people would just tune in. Because what happens is that folks are so enwrapped in like, oh my God, this thing happened to you, that they miss the education, they miss the learning of it. And so that is something that I am feeling really strongly about right now in terms of interviews. Of course, I feel like this is a safe space to do the interview because I know our people, our community would do things to exploit us based on our pain. But I'm finding that even other entities beyond sort of our safe spaces um, are not as mindful or considerate, and it angers me. It really does angers me, and I take this work seriously. I try to do it with as much truth and integrity as much as possible. However, I do feel like it's a slap in the face sometimes that people want to exploit your pain just for, clicks, clickbaits or whatever. And you're right, I definitely don't read the comments, but I will say that I did read the comments on LaShonda's story. And as much as I have reservations about how her story was presented, most of those comments were positive. And I thought, actually, LaShawn, I know I never told you this, but I actually thought that was amazing. That was so, so, so amazing. But I wish there was more of that effort that could have been put in with maybe Vice working within our networks, with our organizations, with HMP, to make it a little bit more of a substantive story versus just getting sensationalism or clicks off of our stories. And so I feel like that is stigmatizing because it doesn't recognize us for what we went through and respecting us for who we are as human beings. Yes, we are people living with HIV. We are humans. And I just think that if the shoe was on the other foot with some of the entities that do these interviews, if the shoe was on the other foot, they wouldn't want to be put out that way. And so I'm happy for the opportunities that people do get to share their stories, but we want to do it in a way that's respectful and with integrity, and in a way that really teaches the rest of the world, the viewers, what we're really talking about here. And so for me, I've kept going, but I am starting to rethink my approach and what I choose to accept in terms of interviews and talking about this issue. But I would say never, miss an opportunity to share this experience, because I think that is the way one of many ways that we start to address stigma and discrimination is by sharing the story, being public and open about the issue.
Thank you for offering that, Robert, and thank you for bringing it up. That's super important because I think oftentimes when we think of sharing our stories and it getting out to the masses, not often do we always think, will this include more stigma? Will this invite more stigma? Will this invite harm to people living with HIV? And it's something that I've been thinking about recently too. I've been thinking about how a lot of times our stories are being brought out as like trauma porn for
Yeah.
folks to filter through. And so, although we know that the revolution will not be televised, hopefully the revolution will be televised cautiously if we allow folks to know our stories so intimately. So I thank you for inviting that into the space. It's important. So, LaShonda, with the recent changes in the Tennessee law, like we were talking about earlier, of them overturning some of those legislation, can you discuss the importance of that legislative change in addressing HIV criminalization?
Well, I think that ending the HIV epidemic in the U.S., it requires addressing structural barriers to HIV prevention and care. Current scientific and medical evidence should inform state lawmakers and practices that criminalize actions taken by people with HIV. States should consider updating or repealing outdated laws and policies. First, the legislators need to be educated on HIV and then educated in HIV criminalization. And by doing all of that, they can see that the laws do not match science whatsoever. And by doing this, they will help us change and repeal these laws.
Yes, that's so true. These outdated laws have to be either modernized or repealed altogether. Hopefully for repeal, but if not, go ahead and modernize these laws to match the updated science. As we all know, these laws were created in the 90s when there was not a lot of education and information about how HIV is transmitted. So, yes, that is so true. Robert, what steps do you think are necessary at the state and federal levels to bring about those policy changes like LaShonda was talking about to protect the rights of people that are impacted by HIV criminalization?
Wow, it's a good question, and it's something that I'm still thinking about even after like a decade of being involved in either state or federal um, initiatives around this issue. I can't stress enough of education. I find that being that it's been a decade in this work, that we have to do re-education to people who, one, that may have never heard of what's going on, and two, for those that have been around but yet may not have been in the know of what's going on. So definitely one step is re-education. Continue to educate people on this issue, because if we're not talking about it, then most folks won't think that it's happening. So that's one thing. Two, I like the approach that the Center for HIV Law and Policy is taking in terms of recognizing the federal law around the American Disabilities Act. What's happening in my mind, the difference is between the state laws and is that if you're accused of the crime, then you're arrested based on an investigation, whether or not you're living with HIV and that sort of thing, and then you're prosecuted and then you're convicted and that. Well, the American Disability Act requires that there be some sort of assessment, assessment to how to assess, are you really a threat, or are you really a danger, based on your disability, that the state is now saying that you are a criminal or alleged criminal because of it. And so I think that's a great strategy that I've not seen used before, that's kind of becoming pretty common strategy for at least from the Center for HIV Law and Policy. So I really think they're onto something, because I think that it makes you stop and really assess the situation. Whereas under the state criminal laws, you're just automatically, when we say innocent until proven guilty, but I mean, they arrest you and put you in jail and all that kind of thing. So what kind of assessment really is going on there, if at all? So I think just between the education and just finding new strategies, innovative strategies that have not been looked at, that people living with HIV, like, we have rights under the federal laws, where even if the states may choose not to recognize it. So that's one thing. And just other steps is just really listening to the community, listening, the CDC listening to the community, the DOJ listening to the community, the legislators, federal and state legislators listening to the community, because we talk about this stuff. We have webinars. We do all sorts of things to educate ourselves, educate others around these issues. But the question is, the powers that be, are they really taking us seriously, as either in partnership or whatever, to learn about what's happening to us on the ground, versus them sort of supporting and enforcing or allowing the enforcement of injustice to continue to happen within these within this HIV criminalization or other forms of criminalization. So those are just a few things that come to mind in terms of steps that, of course, coalition work, and that's part of what I meant by community, continue to coalition build. And I like the fact that we still have our HIV is not a crime training academy, which is huge, to have a particular conference or training academy that's dedicated to this issue. I think it's a very important step. So continue to support that. And also other stakeholders that are interested in this issue, like the funders, the Elizabeth Taylor East Foundation, and all the other Gilead, other entities that have funded this work, are some good steps.
Yes, that's super, super duper important. HINEC, or HIV is not a crime. My first time attending was this year. It was super, super amazing. I learned so much from so many different amazing advocates from around the country and internationally. There were some international advocates there. We even heard from someone who's currently incarcerated due to HIV criminalization who will be home soon. So it was extremely important. And I really want folks who have not been to HINEC to think about going. It's not going to be this next year, but it will be in 2025. So for those who did not get a chance to go to HIV is Not a Crime this year, check out in 2025, because HINEC is something that you do not want to miss.
And Morena, I think the gentleman that you're talking about that was incarcerated,
Mhm.
he is out.
What? He got released?
Yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that, LaShawn.
I think it was about 3 or 4 months ago. Is that right,
Um,
Victor?
I want to say September. That's what's
Okay.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's a blessing, especially
Yes.
being at home for the holidays. Kerry Thomas is his name,
Yes.
and I'm so happy to hear that Kerry is home. He was so, so passionate about HIV criminalization work, and I cannot wait to see what he has in the future in store for his career in the movement and the work he's going to do in the HIV movement. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and I'll just add that Kerry is working with the Zero Project, so he is definitely plugging in and I mean, I want to say continuing his work, because he was already working even as he was incarcerated, which is amazing.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I work with him once a month with the SPJI project. So I get to see him once a month and speak with him. And he's going to help me help another gentleman try to, that's, which I have permission to share his name. His name is Harold Jones, who's locked up as well. And we're trying to get him all the resources he can. And I thought a good person to talk to him about that would be Carrie.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, send Carrie my love, and make sure that he knows that folks in community are rooting for him. Super excited about all of the work that he's doing at the Zero Project, especially with like SPJI and folks who are trying to, make sure that they're doing advocacy work and learning and engaging in the process. So that's super important. Um, Another, I guess, a question I have is, how do we get them resources? How do we get folks resources that are coming into like this reentry space? I know, LaShonda, you were talking about making sure that he has information to be able to get to folks who are currently incarcerated. Do you all have any advice for how do we get folks that could be, getting into the reentry process that were locked up for HIV criminalization?
In my opinion, I think that they would probably need to reach out to, if they can get online, find out everything they can. And what sometimes in prison or in jail, they have the library and they can go research stuff there. But also, it would be great to, pretty much find out who is incarcerated, who's been charged with it, and try to set them up maybe with legal aid and try to get them all the information that they need.
Thank you, LaShonda. Robert, what about you? What resources do you think will be really good for folks who are going into reentry after they have experienced HIV criminalization?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that I would say that we, and when I say we, meaning organizations within the Health Not Prisons Collective, are still processing through, trying to figure out the best way to do that. And one way is to do that is through a rapid response mechanism that we're in the process of creating, that will be a way for people's loved ones or even the person that's being impacted to be able to connect to to H&P or just to the movement. Like I remember when I was going through, I didn't really have anything to connect to, really. And I think most people who go through this experience would know that. But the beauty of all of us that are aware of this issue now is that now when someone is facing prosecution, or even someone that is coming out of prison, that they could go online and Google and be able to find a movement, a community or network of people, or some tool or resource that is available. That wasn't available for at least for me a decade ago. And so I find great joy in knowing that that all of us today could at any point be that point of access or point of entry for someone who is either coming out of prison as a result of this experience or someone who's currently facing prosecution. And so through the Health Not Prisons Collective, we're working on the rapid response mechanism that will be a process in supporting people financially, in a way that, you know, if they need money for fees or fines, that we'll be able to support them, and also support their loved ones in understanding and navigating this experience when their loved one is going through a prosecution. And then also, you know, Carrie's a great example that someone who well, for him, he's been involved while he was incarcerated, but when you get out, you know, there are entities, there are organizations here that people can plug in and connect with, and at least start volunteering in some way, just to get the lay of the land, understand the ropes, because it's what I did. I had just plugged into, at the time, it's the Positive Justice Project. I didn't know anybody, didn't know anything about anything except what I had gone through. But I was glad to just sort of be in the midst of the fact that there are people who cared about it on some level, whether it was a lawyer or policy person. So there's several resources just by finding out who are the partners, who are the stakeholders. And again, the Elizabeth Taylor Hayes Foundation, the Health Not Prisons Collective, Center for HIV Law and Policy, like all these various organizations have made some type of footprint within the media, within social media, and within our community, that to at least hopefully allow different points of entry for those that are impacted or affected.
Thank you for telling me all those resources, especially all of those folks that are doing amazing work. We talked a little bit about like your work that you all are doing to help in HIV criminalization. We talked about a little bit of your background and discrimination and stigma. We even talked about policy. I want to ask you all, how can we all work together to create more awareness about these challenges around HIV criminalization, and how we can really support the people that are on the sex offender registry due to HIV criminalization? So how can we create more awareness about this? And how can we help folks that are living with HIV that are on the sex offender registry list due to HIV criminalization?
Hmm.
And I'm going to ask that to Robert first.
Okay. I I hope, and I know that this is just more intentional work that we have to do, which I don't mind, that if there are those that are on the registries within the various states, which only five or six states still require people to be on the registry, that they are at least aware of our movement to decrim HIV. I hope they know that, and so it's just a matter of finding ways, to, you know, to connect with them, and it may meaning them serving out their time, and then finally getting connected, or it may mean that, you know, we have to. I think if anything, we just continue to do what we're doing and continue to build what we're trying to build, and hopefully that people will find us. And I think just through us sharing, continue to share our experiences, you know, in those particular interviews, or just like this, you know, random interviews that we can repurpose and use in all sorts of forms to just spread the word out there. We have to continue to talk about it. And what I would like to say is just more of having those one-on-one conversations or group conversations within our community. That is a surefire way of people finding out and being not, and I also like the fact of being knowledgeable, so that if it's not you that experience it, maybe somebody else, that folks can make a referral, right? To say, oh, I know of a particular entity that's doing work around this. And so I would like to hope to have more intimate conversations with folks within the community, and helping them understand just how vulnerable they are when it comes to this crisis of criminalization. Because we all are impacted by it, and people like myself and LaShonda, we are witnesses to that, that how it can happen. And so that is some ways that I would hope that either folks that are on the registry know that there's a movement out there, there are people working on it, or that those of us that are out in the free world, that we will do our best to talk this issue up, because you never know when you might need to share this information to someone, and that could be useful.
I love the saying by the Zero Project. You are impacted by HIV criminalization, you just don't know it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel as if everyone in the United States is impacted by it, because we've seen how they tried to incarcerate folks that were living with COVID. And we see how our public health officials try to always criminalize folks for having public health crises. And we know that that doesn't work. We've seen it with so many different other health scares in the United States and so many other pandemics and epidemics. So I'm grateful that all of these organizations are really working diligently to help end HIV criminalization. Y'all, finally, as we wrap up our conversation, and I hate to end this conversation because it's so rich and I'm learning so much about each of you, how can the broader community, including those who are not living with HIV, contribute to our efforts to help dismantle and end HIV criminalization here in the United States? And I'll turn it over to LaShonda first.
Okay. You can get help by getting educated about criminalization. Speak, email, or call your legislator or the Senate and let them know about these laws and how they are hurting people just because they're HIV positive. And, my hope for the future will be that all of these laws within the 16 states that have these laws will repeal or amend them, because they need to be, because they're not matching science at all.
And thank you for that nugget. And I definitely want folks to know that. Thank you. What about you, Robert?
Could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Definitely, no problem. Finally, as we wrap up our conversation, how can the broader community, including those not living with HIV, contribute to the efforts in dismantling HIV criminalization?
Oh, wow. I think early on, LaShonda mentioned about HNP's approach. It's an intersectional approach. And I think if anybody's been following HNP, they definitely are getting involved around other issues, whether it be sexual and reproductive justice, abortion issues. And so, if people aren't, clear about their involvement or understanding around HIV, there's definitely other issues that can serve as avenues, because again, some of the same people that may be living with HIV, or other people who are facing other issues, or most likely can be the same people. It's the same people. And so that's why we have to take an intersectional approach in this work, and not be siloed, and not work in silos. And I think in that way, that it will at least show people that we do care about more than one or two issues, but we care because we care about people and what happens to our communities, that we have to pay attention to all these other issues. And so, so I give no excuse. I feel like there is no excuse for people to not find a way to be involved, because if you don't want to know much about HIV, but you know much about these other issues, that you could also that can also be a way to get involved and learn more. And by working with other issues, you learn more about certain communities that you may not have been as informed on. And so, and of course, I'll also add just keep talking. People talk about the things that you don't know, talk about the things that you are fearful of. You never know what you might learn. And you also may never know what day is going to be your day when we'll all have to come and fight against issues that directly impact you. And so it seems like it's so easy for us when it's not our issue that we kind of can stand, stand against the wall on. But the thing is that we all have to find ways to work together. And that's why also I'll add this, that through H&P, we are supporting BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders, because we know that our communities are impacted greatly. And so we have to develop the leaders in order to I won't say to stay relevant, but to just stay in the game. Because if no one's following me, maybe they're following LaShonda. If it's not LaShonda, it's someone else. And so that is why. So, or it might be you, Marnie, of course. It could be any of us. And so that's why it's so important to support Black leaders, because the influence and the reach that we each may have, but collectively, or our sphere of influence, shall I say, could help people who may not be aware of the issues that we're fighting learn about them. So.
And I want to thank you both for being so amazing and being so vulnerable throughout this entire conversation. My last question is going to be to LaShonda. We talked a lot today about the Health Not Prisons Collective, or H&P. Can you just tell us a little bit about how H&P has impacted your life?
Wow, that's an amazing question. H&P has helped me to pretty much come out of my shell. They gave me an opportunity to come out of my shell, to be who I am, and just speak from the heart, educate, fight. And most of all, their sayings is, you got this. And that helps me to get by when I'm down and don't want to fight anymore, because things aren't going my way. And it's, you got this, you matter, you're rocking this. And those words give me the encouragement to say, hey, LaShonda, you can't stop fighting. It's not over.
Mm-hmm.
That's really beautiful. And I'm glad that you're an H&P advocate. I'm glad we're doing it together as H&P advocates. And thank you, Robert, for starting Zero, which is a partner of H&P. So
Yes.
I want to express my gratitude to both of you for joining us today, for being so vulnerable in your responses, and for generously sharing your vulnerable insights and your valuable insights with us. Let's persist in this meaningful dialogue and aim to illuminate the experiences of people living with HIV that are impacted by HIV criminalization, and ignite a positive change that we're going to dismantle these laws once and for all. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you,
Thank
Marnie.
you.
Make sure, if you're not, to follow us at Health Not Prisons on all social media platforms at H&P Collective, and on our website, healthnotprisons.org. Thank you all so much for being here and for listening.